for that generous introduction. And thanks also for your wishes. I would like to thank the Department of English in Gondwana University and all the members of the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to be with you today and to share my thoughts. Uh, I hope we will have about a 45 minutes session, right, Weber? Yeah, okay. So let me share my screen first, and please confirm if you are able to see it. Right. All right. So the title of this talk has been chosen in a slightly different sense. So you see two words there, curriculum and future, and you see an arrow pointing both ways because I would like to connect both things. So broadly speaking, my plan today is not to go into the theory of curriculum or the structure or components or principles and processes of designing curriculum, but to discuss some general issues about curriculum, which are important whenever not just an English BOS, but any body in the university sits down to think about the curriculum. So what I'm going to speak about will be in two broad parts. In the first part, I propose to speak about the curriculum of the future. And in the second part, I propose to speak about the future of the curriculum. And probably now you realize why there was that double-headed arrow in the title. So both things are very closely related to each other, but I will be only limiting myself to a few important aspects, obviously because of the shortage of time, but also because it's such a complex and large topic that any long session cannot do justice to all aspects. My purpose of the talk today is, after having discussed those aspects, suggest some implications of what we discuss. And I would also end by raising some questions, which I think we all need to keep at the back of our mind whenever we think of curriculum design or syllabus design. So let's begin with the first part. As I said, I would be looking at general issues in curriculum. And here we are trying to think of how curriculums might look in the future. So if we are proposing to be ready for the future, what are the core issues that we need to think of? This thinking about the future is very strongly influenced by how higher education is changing all over the world. And I'm just pointing out two or three important trends which are significantly changing the very nature and structure of higher education. One of the most important change, very, very remarkable and strong change, especially over the last 30, 35 years, is the change in the thinking about the purpose of higher education. Why should there be universities and colleges? And why should students join them? And why should teachers teach at them? Until the beginning of this century or a few years before the end of the last century, higher education institutions were typically the places where people came to enhance their knowledge, to understand the world better, to learn a few skills. Some of the people also came there to be good citizens and develop possibilities for bright careers. That job-oriented nature is now secondary in the global trends in higher education. Universities and colleges are increasingly seen as places where knowledge is generated, knowledge is created. If you remember how NAC accreditation metrics have changed over the last 10 years, or how promotional criteria have changed over the last 10 years, or how teachers are valued today, one of the things that we very clearly notice is the insistence on number of publications, innovation, and patents. All these three are indicators, so-called indicators, I would say, of knowledge creation. In other words, teachers have to demonstrate that they have been creating knowledge. They have been making new additions to the existing knowledge base. While students, they have to demonstrate that they are preparing their students as knowledge creators. Secondly, technology and the ease with which we can communicate across geographies, across continents, and across any kind of space and time barrier. These are massive influences on higher education, especially in the last 10 years, as technology becomes cheaper, faster, more efficient, and more widespread. It is no wonder that education sector is heavily shaped by how technology grows. And during the last 1 year, we have seen how the whole approach, orientation, and thinking about education is changing just because technology has come in a very strong way during the corona pandemic. And finally, one of the important changes that's happening in higher education at the moment all over the world is this disruption of the old-fashioned traditional ideas about higher education and the frameworks of higher education. About ideas, I already said that why there should be universities and colleges and why students should go there and teachers should teach there. That very notion, traditional notion of a university, has significantly changed in the last 10 years. And in terms of framework, the structure of university is no longer what we were familiar with 50 years ago. And I will be mentioning this again towards the end of this session with some interesting examples. So if we are looking towards the curriculum for the future, what kind of future do we expect? I showed you some trends in higher education, which give us some hints of where we are heading to. They tell us how the future is laying before us. But nearer home in our own country, I'm choosing the latest new education, national education policy 2020 as an indicator of what kind of future is being imagined in the Indian education system. And I will be using this example to discuss some key issues. If you look at the NEP 2020 document, you will notice that there are these four key terms or key themes which occur very, very frequently. One is interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Second is multilingualism. Third is research. And fourth is indigenous knowledge and practices. Let's look at the first one, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. One of the important developments which started at the beginning of the 20th century and it picked up speed after the Second World War was this challenge to the traditional idea of disciplines. Already after the Second World War, when new branches like linguistics and psychoanalytics became established, already the idea of the discipline, the old idea of the discipline was being challenged. And now in the 21st century, it is almost on the verge of collapse. Though in our own areas in Vidarbha or Maharashtra or in many parts of India, we still go by the traditional boundaries between disciplines like arts, commerce, science, technology, management, etc. These boundaries have become extremely weak now. It's no more possible for any educational program to be limited to a watertight compartment of one discipline if it wants to be a useful, relevant, and forward-looking program. And this is exactly what the new national education policy underlines. And it brings in a very strong focus on how disciplines mingle with each other, how there is a regular interaction between them, how there is a merger of disciplines, and how we give up the old ideas of discipline and think of disciplines in a new way. Many of you may be aware that the national education policy has a 20-year time frame. It came up in 2020. So first 10 years, by 2030, the target is to put all the provisions of the policy in practice. So by 2030, the policy will be fully operational. And in the next 10 years, up to 2040, it will be tried out completely and a review will be taken in 2040. That is the idea, that is the plan. One of the concrete targets defined in the national education policy is that by 2030, all universities and colleges in India would become multidisciplinary. There will not be any higher education institution which will offer only one discipline. In my own university, which is just a humanities and social sciences university, we have already been told that we should think of introducing science and technology to whatever extent possible. So multidisciplinarity is going to be the keyword and defining feature of our higher education system. And therefore, when we think of programs, that degree programs or courses, programs and courses are the terms typically used in the national education discussions. In our own context, if we think of Nagpur University or Garchar University, we call programs as courses. For example, BA course, BSc course, BBA course, and courses as papers. So English literature is a paper, or economics is a paper, sociology is a paper. But the general trend is to call BA, BSc, BBA, BCom as programs, and those papers as courses. This idea of programs courses will be changed completely, as far as I guess, in the next 5-6 years. And if you look at universities which have been set up recently, look at the universities, the new universities which have come up in the last 15 years, especially private universities, and go to their website and look at the list of degree programs they offer, and you will not see very traditional programs. So it's important, therefore, if we are going for a multidisciplinary future, interdisciplinary future, it is inevitable, in a sense, that the domains will be restructured. It will not be anymore possible to talk of just economics or just sociology or just history. That will happen at the school level when those domains are introduced to a child, when the child starts picking up the branches of education. But once in the university, it will be difficult to see very clear-cut domains as we see today. And as the domains are going to be restructured, university departments, university programs, university structures, and the expertise of people in the university, they all will change. Actually, I should not use the word will, indicating the future. but say that they are already changing. Just to repeat what I said earlier, look at the websites of newly set up universities. In my own university, we have a department of global affairs, another department of law, governance, and citizenship, another department of cultural and creative expressions. Now, these are not the typical departments which we find in a typical university. We are used to looking at departments of mathematics and department of sociology and department of psychology. So this is an indication of how domains are being restructured, how boundaries between disciplines are broken, and how it is very common, going to be very common to see economics, sociology, linguistics, and philosophy with mathematics and physics merged together, either in a degree program or in some papers, in some courses. And it will also be very common when you meet a university teacher and ask that person what his or her expertise is. Or another concrete question is what the PhD that person had done in. And we should not be surprised to hear that the PhD was on the biology of music or psychology of computers or the information technology in family counseling, whatever. So all kinds of mix and merge is going to be, it's already quite common nowadays in leading universities. The second key term is multilingualism, particularly because our country is a predominantly multilingual country, where typically in any classroom, we find many languages present. Both the teachers and the students in that classroom are speakers of many languages, though the education system itself may be limited to a few languages. The national education policy speaks about multilingualism very, very frequently because it argues that being multilingual is an important asset, as an important benefit we already have, and that benefit should be further strengthened. And for that purpose, there are some interesting suggestions, though some of them are controversial, debatable, and some of them may not be practical. But if you have looked through the document, you will see some interesting provisions. For example, one of the provisions says that all kind of teaching, and I'm not exaggerating because the word all is mentioned there, all kind of teaching should be at least bilingual. What does it mean? In simple terms, if you are a teacher in an English medium university or a college, or if you are teaching an English medium course, you are still expected not to restrict yourself only to English, but use another language or other couple of languages which the classroom has represented. So mixing languages, using multiple languages in teaching or used by students or even having bilingual materials is recognized, considered as valid, and encouraged. Actually, another provision in the policy says that there should be a whole force and a strong program to convert current materials into bilingual materials. And teachers, students, and materials producers should be encouraged to make bilingual or multilingual materials. As I said, this is a complex and quite challenging topic because how many languages we can address this way and which ones is going to be a tricky issue. But another thing that is promoted looking at the future is promotion of learning languages more strongly at all levels, right from the school level till the university level. Children should be encouraged to learn multiple languages, and it is suggested that there could be focus on three groups of languages. One, classical languages like Sanskrit, Tamil, Persian, then current Indian languages, and if you are speaker of one Indian language, then you should try to learn another Indian language. And the third group is modern global languages like Chinese, Japanese, German, or Spanish. But one of the most controversial, unresolved, complicated issue is the medium of instruction. And here, in my view, the policy has not made its thinking clear about the future of the curriculum of the future. I think it is a kind of political compromise made in the policy by saying that local languages, mother tongues, home languages of children should be the instruction of, the medium of instruction. Children must get education at least till the secondary level in their own languages. But the policy stops there, having said that it doesn't make any further provisions, and goes on to say that English will continue, and as far as possible, teachers should be bilingual, material should be converted into bilingual materials, so all kind of support should be provided. Coming to the third, and which I believe is very, very closely related, directly, strongly related to us. I said earlier that one of the most important trends in the changing higher education scenario is the focus on knowledge creation. Higher education institutions are valuable only to the extent that they are able to create knowledge, generate knowledge. If you simply borrow technology from America or UK or Japan and use it at home, then you are still, as a country, dominated by other people's economies. So it's important that we develop technology, we invent and discover things at home, we come up with new products and ideas and technology and designs. That is the focus on knowledge creation. And understanding this to be the most important feature of the future, the policy very, very strongly and repeatedly recommends that research should be brought in at all levels of higher education. Actually, at one place, the policy says that research aptitude, research thinking, interest in research should be promoted right from the school level. But a more formal engagement, involvement in research should be included right from the UG courses. Probably you are aware that now the proposal is to convert all the 3-year degree programs into 4-year degree programs. In my university, we are already working on that, and from the next academic year, that is in around July, August, our BA, we have all BA programs and BBA programs. Those programs will become 4-year programs. But it's not just the duration. There are two strongly suggested changes which universities are asked to try to bring in. One is to allow students to include research as a way of completing their degree. In other words, if a student joins a BA or BSc 4-year program, the university should offer an option where part of the curriculum is classroom teaching, but some part of the curriculum is research, which the students can do in the field, in laboratories, wherever. So achieving a degree by research should be allowed even at the undergraduate level. And probably you are also aware that very soon the structure of higher education institution is proposed to be changed, and there would be a clear distinction between teaching universities and research universities. But I'm not going into the other complicated details of this proposal, but I'm just looking at one interesting meaning of this proposal, because we are thinking of curriculum. So from the perspective of curriculum designing or preparing, we should understand the role of research. Research is self-directed learning. What does it mean? It means that the learner takes control of learning and the learner learns at their own pace, their own speed, their own desire, their own needs and interests. Let me give one example, simple example, but an imaginary example. Suppose Gondwana University BOS wants to design a curriculum which promotes self-directed learning. Then it will not have courses, textbooks, unitization, fixed assessment patterns, or even teaching workloads and teaching plans. It will have courses, it will have teaching plans, but those will be just by way of introduction. And students will be free to choose whatever they want to learn, whenever, wherever, at whatever speed. The way many of us attend online free courses where the material is there uploaded. Whenever you feel like you go look at some material, download it, study it, do some task, try to learn a few things, and then for a couple of months you forget it, then go back again to. So it's completely in the learner's control. That is self-directed learning, where the learner decides the direction of learning. Research is a way of supporting that self-directed learning. If research is built into a BA program or a BSc program, then some part of that 4-year program will be spent by the learners on their own. It will not be a dictated, directed classroom teaching. So I hope you can see what implication this has for our curriculum design. So in general, the national education policy is promoting more student choice and more student control rather than the university or the college or the teacher deciding everything. That is what currently happens. University decides that in BA first year, English, literature, the students will have to study these 4 papers or 4 units, these 6 authors, these 10 poems, these 5 stories in this way, and they will have to write this kind of examination, and then we will declare them pass or fail. Complete control in the hands of the university, in the hands of the system, very limited choice or sometimes absolutely no choice or control for the student. For future directions, it's very important to be more open and more flexible. The last point in this first part is the importance of indigenous knowledge and practices. In other words, the local. I'm using slightly different word here. It's a very important proposal in my view. Taking up the term itself and the idea itself in the national education policy is an important development. Indigenous knowledge in the sense the knowledge that is created within India by Indian people, often using traditional practices and not always recorded, not always documented. To give an example, uh, Gadchiroli is a very prime example of lots of indigenous knowledge systems and practices. So for example, what is the local practice around health and medical treatment? So people probably go to forest, collect some herbs and herbal medicine and use it for their treatment. Now that's some kind of knowledge. Where did that knowledge come from? It came from indigenous traditions and practices, and how that knowledge is passed on or it is expanded or generated or transferred, trained. There are practices. There is no school for that. There is no syllabus or textbook for that. There is no university. And this is just one example in hundreds of kinds. For example, even in what kind of recipes are prepared in one community based on the locally available material. I can share one very interesting example. In Delhi, there is a group called Urban Foragers. And do you know what they do? It's a small group of interested people who want to learn about whatever plants are available around them, just growing wildly. And someone who is well versed with them, well informed with them, works as a guide. And on Sundays, this group goes out and uh, walks for 3 4 hours in one particular locality, and they start picking up plants, wild plants growing along the footpath, in a public park, or even on the road dividers. These are just wild plants, but they are eatable. They are very good, nutritious plants. And then they also learn what things can be cooked using them, how, and they try this urban foragers. But where did this knowledge come from? The origins were through traditions and practices. Recognizing this indigenous knowledge is a very important step. Though I have my reservations about this whole proposal, because it seems that the very idea of indigenous knowledge is explained or defined in a very peculiar way, only to highlight certain kinds of indigenous knowledge and not any indigenous knowledge in general. But for Gondwana University, for English Board of Studies, what is the use of this? What is the importance of this? The importance of this is that if we are going to prepare for future, then our work, our syllabuses, curriculums, textbooks, material, teaching will be inappropriate, irrelevant, unless we recognize what happens locally. If we don't bring in local knowledge systems, local practices. In other words, if there are 25 students joining MA English program in Gondwana University, and it's very likely that these students will be from surrounding tribal population, what kind of experience they have about learning? Quite possibly many of them are first generation learners. So they are not used to opening books, reading them, memorizing them, doing homework, writing things in a notebook. They may not be familiar with that kind of learning tradition, but they have been learning hundreds of things. So as teachers, do we know what their indigenous practices are? What knowledge they bring? They may not know English grammar, but they may know hundreds of other things. Can we make a connection between them? If knowing what is active voice and passive voice is going to be useless in their life in future, why should they learn it? And why should we ask them to waste their talent and energy? But if we are able to make a connection between learning active and passive voice with their life, and we are able to show how they can use this knowledge for making their own lives better, then we are making a happy marriage between our objectives and teaching systems and their knowledge and practices. And that's why there is not only an opportunity, a possibility, but there is also a very strong need to include indigenous knowledge and practices in our uh, curriculums. So that was the first part. And if you remember, the first part was about the curriculum of the future. What should we think of the future and how we should design curriculum for that? The second part is what will happen to the very idea of curriculum in future. Now we are familiar with one or a set of orientations or ideas about curriculum. There are different ideas, and I'm aware that Dr. Krishna Dikshit in his session talked about how curriculum is understood differently by different people, how there are multiple meanings of curriculum, and how multiple orientation as well as practices about curriculum. For example, in a university like Ashoka or even my own university, we begin with the overall philosophy and thinking, and then we first chalk out the trajectory of the graduate student and then accordingly design a broad framework. And that's how we begin with the curriculum. In a university like Nagpur University, I suspect that when we think of curriculum, we simply sit down and see how many papers should be provided and how many units in each paper and what should be the paper pattern and what should be the textbook. So these are different views. I am not making any comment about the goodness or badness about any of these methods, but just suggesting that these are different ways. What will happen to the very idea of curriculum in future? The key question is who will make the curriculum in future? The future curriculum, in my view, will be made in two ways. The system will make its own curriculum and student will make their own curriculum. I don't know whether you will agree with this or not. This is happening anyway. The teacher comes to the classroom with one plan because the teacher knows the curriculum and has a teaching plan and wants to teach a particular unit in particular classroom or wants to cover, as we often use that word, want to cover the syllabus, teach 8 stories out of 10 and then dictate notes and question answers on that. That is the teacher's curriculum, which draws from what the university made. When students come to the classroom, they bring their own curriculum. They have their vested interest in certain stories and not in some others, or they are interested only in the answers which the student teacher will dictate and not in the explanations. But that's a metaphorical sense. If we are thinking of the future, this will be a standard practice. We already are on that way. What is CBCS system? If we talk about CBCS system, choice-based credit system, what is happening there? Something like a hotel. So what a hotel does is to prepare a range of choices and not necessarily have all the choices ready, cooked and stored in pots, but it still has a menu card and it offers lots and lots of choices in different categories. So for starters, you have one set of choices. For main course, you have another. For chapatis, you have third. For salads, you have fourth. For desserts or sweets, you have fifth. Just various things. So that is the system-made curriculum. Now, when you go and place your order, what you do is you look at the choices and then you pick different things from different groups, put them together, combine them together, and you have your order for your lunch or dinner. That is your curriculum. So think of the University Board of Studies at someone or some place which is preparing the hotel menu. In future, the curriculum would take this kind of nature. It's already happening. In many universities, that system is already in place. So what happens is the university or the college offers a range of choices. The students come, and at the time of admissions and then at the beginning of every semester, they look at what is available on the menu card and they mix and combine what they want to choose. And in this way, they make their own curriculum. So it will be, and it is already in some places, but now all over India in every university and college, this will be the system where there will be two makers of curriculum, which means that it will not be enough for us to make just one set of menu. You cannot say to the customer, if you are a hotel owner, that we have only gobi ki sabji available, we have only aloo ka paratha available, and only tea available. No choices of sabji, no choices of dal. That won't work anymore. Because the purpose is not only to offer more voice and control to students, and not only offer more flexibility and choice, but also to ensure that we are not anymore producing students of arts, students of commerce, students of science. Remember where we started this session with multidisciplinary. Students of future will not be students of arts, commerce, or science. They will be students of whatever disciplines they are interested in, and there will not be any boundaries. So if you are taking chemistry, it will not stop you from taking psychology or English literature and accounting and statistics. So this is essentially taking the CBCS system further. And I'm seriously telling you that we should be prepared for this, not because the government will make it compulsory. Government has already made it compulsory, but we are expert in finding ways out of it. I'm saying because if we are really interested in future, at least for our own survival of our colleges and universities, and our own jobs as teachers, this is the direction which we have to take, no option for that. The notion of the curriculum will change. It will not be anymore the traditional set of textbooks and syllabuses and assessment patterns. And therefore, how we think of syllabus, what objectives we are designing curriculum for, what will go into the curriculum, the content, what kind of assessment will be followed, all this will change. But importantly, there will be lots of structural changes. The very structure of BOS will change. Now imagine, I'm just giving an imaginary example, and I'm not sure how soon this will happen, but my sense is this is going to happen. There will not be any board of studies in English because the University of the future will not have a department of English. It is very likely have a department of languages, but even that looks like a less possible, lesser possibility. What is likely to happen is whenever any body sits down to design a curriculum, that curriculum will be interdisciplinary. So it will be a board of studies where there could be some members from science, some from psychology, some from sociology, some from languages, some from technology. And they will try to put together a curriculum which is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. How that curriculum is designed and what would be the component, what would be the elements, all that will change. Importantly, the key work of universities and higher education institutions is assessment. The very notion of assessment will change for two reasons at least. One, because more and more choice is to be offered and control is to be offered to students. And secondly, research and self-directed learning is expected to come in a big way in our teaching learning. And therefore, I strongly believe that very soon our conventional traditional degrees, programs, and subjects will go out. It's quite possible. If I'm saying all this, assuming that the national education policy will uh, do what it says, it will be implemented in a positive way, keeping the political agenda aside and thinking of the future of the nation and the future of our students. If those are implemented, then very soon no university will offer a BA program or BSc program, or it may be still called BA, but it will not be BA English literature. It would be BA with all kind of mixture. And finally, therefore, our own methodology, pedagogy, our teaching practice will change. So coming to the end of this session, what are the broad implications? If we want to think what all this means, then we should ask ourselves some questions. There are no single answers to these questions, and we all will have to find our own answers. But thinking about these questions will give us a clearer idea of what implications there are of whatever we discussed so far. So let's ask ourselves, in our own college, in our own university, in our own town, where will be our students in 10 years' time? So this is 2020. What kind of students you are expecting in 2030? Or in 25 years' time, maybe 2050, and I know that Gondwana University has a lot of young faculty. So all dear friends, you are going to be there for at least another 20 years. So in another 20 years, what kind of students will come to the departments of Gondwana University? How will Gondwana University itself change? How it will be in 10 years' time, in 25 years' time? So thinking of the students in 2050 or the university itself in 2050, are we preparing them for that future? Are we preparing ourselves for that future? Are we designing curriculums, thinking of programs, building all kinds of infrastructure facilities and practices so that when there are drastic changes in 10 years' time, we are ready for that? It is usually said that good organizations and good teachers keep one eye on the present and the other eye on the future. So we cannot deny our responsibility for preparing our students for the present. A student has taken admission today, and in 3 years' time, the student is likely to graduate and stop education and go for some kind of career or job. That is the immediate need. Are we preparing for that present need? So that is one part of our responsibility. The other part is, are we also preparing the students for future? Are we preparing ourselves and our institutions for future? And what kind of balance do we make between the present and the future? These are the questions which are going to guide us when we think of curriculum design. These questions are immediate and important because only 50 years ago, changes used to be very slow. Now they are very rapid, and I'm absolutely sure that we will see remarkable changes in just 5 years, in 5 years' time. Uh, so the last question to end this session is how we connect all these questions with curriculums, because that is the core focus of this 5-day workshop. How do we make curriculums so that they partly address the responsibility for the present, but also drive our students, our teachers, and our institutions toward the future? So we have to look forward as well. So thank you so much for your patient listening, and thanks again for giving me this opportunity. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you, sir.
Stop sharing.
If participants have any queries, please write your doubts in question answer box on your screen. Dear participants, we are still waiting for your question. Uh, what was, sir? Can you see questions in chat box?
Yeah, I can see the question. Thank you, Dr. Bidwai. The question is, due to COVID-19, the system of education has changed. What type of education should be provided and implemented in our rural area? Uh, I would look at that question in two ways. One is there is an immediate response to that situation, which we have been trying over the last year and possibly continue to try for the next year, because the effect of the pandemic will not wash away very soon. The obvious response, I think you are all familiar with. What kind of education are we providing? we are trying to go online. We are trying to use alternative ways of connecting with our students. We are trying to go away from printed material and use other kinds of material. We are trying to bring in mobile phones, laptops, or even TV, radio, YouTube channels to communicate. What is happening at the moment still has a very limited impact, because as soon as the pandemic began, lockdown began and all kinds of challenges came before us, through trial and error method, we tried lot many things. But you will agree that all our efforts were focused on how to create a link between the teacher and the student. So the student wasn't coming to the classroom and meeting the teacher face to face. The teacher wasn't able to use the blackboard and explain things directly to the student. So we used alternative ways. But that's the only thing we tried to change. Unfortunately, we are still not giving enough attention to change other things. It's not enough to replace physical interaction with online interaction. We will need to change our textbook. We will need to change our examination pattern. What's happening now is uh, we are just making very superficial change. So instead of holding examination at the examination center, we are holding it online. But has the nature of examination changed? Not much. Probably we have reduced the number of descriptive answers and brought in more multiple choice answers because technology demands it, not because there is any other well-informed, well-thought planning behind it. So what I'm suggesting is COVID has given us this opportunity and we should use it. We will need to change the very syllabus, textbooks, content, assessment, everything. I have a little reservation about the expression you have used, Dr. Bidwai, rural area. Uh, I think we use the term rural area to suggest that this is an area where everything is bad. The students are bad, the facilities are bad, the teachers are bad. Sometimes teachers don't agree with this. The institutions are bad, infrastructure is bad, everything is bad. We will have to be critical about that. And we will have to think whether we are justified in saying this. Because the problems we face in rural areas are not unique to rural areas, they are everywhere. So there are problems of students not being interested, but that's not typical to rural alone. There are problems of lack of facilities. That's not limited to only rural areas. There are challenges of communicating with the students, again, not only for rural areas. So these are general challenges. I would hesitate to make a special case of rural area. So I hope I was able to answer your question.
Thank you, sir. Another response from Dr. Sunil Bidwai.
Yeah, even today we are unable to communicate with them due to poor internet connectivity. Uh, I completely agree with you. How is possible? And even in Delhi, in my own classes, I have a group of 35 in one class, and out of 35, there are 8 students who simply have no way of connecting, and they cannot attend my classes. I do hold online classes, and some of the people can attend. And I record every class and upload the classroom recording for students to watch it later. And even that's not possible. Uh, so that's the reality. That's there. And if you want me to give any solution, suggest any solution for that, I will simply say no. Sorry, I don't have any solution. What I simply hope that my students connect with their classmates and somehow try to do things. I try to make things easier for them. Why there is no solution? Because the solution is never short term. We hope and we have I think we have all reasons to hope that very soon there will be massive investment in developing the infrastructure so that even in a small village good quality Wi-Fi services will be available. Actually they are already available. I sometimes feel it ironic and sometimes I become suspicious when my students tell them that they have problems connecting in their rural places because they are able to watch Netflix, they are active on Facebook, they watch YouTube videos, and that kind of facilities are available even in many smaller places. But when it comes to education, when it comes to classes, they come up with lots of complaints. So I believe that on the one hand, it is very true that as a country, we have to massively upgrade our infrastructure, internet infrastructure. But on the other hand, we also need to actually check what is the truth and to what extent it is true without dismissing students' complaints. There is a comment from Dr. Vivek Joshi also. So though the change is inevitable, there is constant resistance toward the changes. So any measures to overcome this block? Uh, Change is inevitable and resistance to change is equally inevitable. I don't know if any of you attended, was there at another talk I gave for the Guwahati University. And there I had mentioned some historical milestones of changes in education. And some of you might be familiar with those changes. When printing was invented and for the first time printed books came into education, there was such a strong resistance in the educational institution at that time with that printing presses were burnt down, books were burnt down. When ball pens were invented and they started coming into the schools, there was such a strong resistance that children were punished for using ball pens. When laptops and typing came up, even today in many schools and colleges, students are not allowed to type their answers. They are asked only to write in their hands. So these are just few examples. This has been history. This has been happening all the time. So any change has some resistance. And uh, nobody can organize ready-made measures to overcome this block. The standard understanding is when there is a change, there are three kinds of people. One kinds are called early adopters. So as soon as a new gadget comes in, as soon as a new software comes, they immediately adapt to it. And there are slow adopters who take their time, watch what other people are doing, look at their experience, and if they feel interested or convinced, then they adopt it, then they join it. And then there are people who are skeptical from the beginning till end and never change and never bother to change. So those things are going to be there. I believe if the change is good and beneficial, it will impose itself. If it is not, it will be enthusiastically accepted by some, but very soon it will fizzle out. So I hope, Dr. Joshi, I was able to partly respond to your comment.
Oh, thank you, sir, for your response. Uh, any other response from participant? Okay, I assume that no doubts from the participants. I move forwards.
Vaibhav, I can see one more uh, response there.
Okay, sir.
Can I respond to it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The comment is about cultural and herbal medicine that we need to include in the syllabus. However, the local citizens are hesitant in sharing their innovations. They have language problems too. What would you suggest in such circumstances? Two things I would like to say. One is I used herbal medicine only as an example to show that there is a huge amount of traditional local knowledge available. It is up to us how we can try to understand that availability of knowledge and connect the knowledge in our systems with that. It doesn't mean that in all kinds of syllabuses, herbal medicine should be brought in. So that's one thing, and I'm sure you did not mean that, but I'm just making it clear so that there are no wrong impressions. Second problem about sharing of sharing of that knowledge, and it's a larger problem. On the one hand, it's the problem with our idea of what is acceptable knowledge and what is not. Currently, all over the world, this is the hot debate going on. Uh, and the debate is about our higher education systems which validate, accept, legitimize, promote only one kind of knowledge. And they disregard, neglect, downplay any other kinds of knowledge which doesn't fit into that system. If you are interested in the history of this, just look back at 19th century Oxford movement, because we are all teachers of English and familiar with English literature. Oxford movement is one indication of how the traditional systems were being challenged. And starting from that period, slowly the so-called scientific paradigm of knowledge became so dominant in the next 100 years that other kinds of knowledges are being downplayed or neglected. That's why when a doctor tells you to take one kind of medicine, we ignorantly or blindly believe that doctor and just simply take that medicine. I'm not blaming or criticizing. I'm just saying that we blindly believe the doctor because we have justifications. The doctor comes with a degree and experience, and we believe that the degree and the experience has been relevant for us to trust him. If another person tells us, depending on our orientation, we may equally blindly believe that person and accept it. For example, the hundreds of WhatsApp messages circulating over the last year suggesting so many remedies against the coronavirus, those are the examples. So right from ginger and lemon to holding your breath for 60 seconds, all kinds of things are blindly accepted. What happens at the system level is a doctor's prescription is accepted by the system as valid knowledge, and the knowledge available in other places is not. I'm not going into the issue of uh, how we justify or test or validate. I'm only suggesting that other alternative ways of gaining knowledge have to be recognized, and this is what is being debated all over. Let me give one example, which I'm very closely familiar with. My district is a lake district full of large number of large lakes, and fishing is one of the traditional occupation happening for generations, for centuries. And the fisher community, the Dhivar community, has a lot of knowledge about fish types, their diseases, and how to treat them. And as you correctly say, they have language problems, so their knowledge is limited to their community. It cannot be shared with others. And that knowledge is not recognized by veterinary scientists who bring in their own system of treating the diseases of fish. Now, it's not a question between which knowledge is better. is the question of why our system privileges one kind of knowledge over another, and how we can build bridges between these two. How we can help, on the one hand, the diverse community people to share their knowledge with the wider scientific community in the scientific way, and how we can bring in scientists to the diverse community to do experiments, work, and sit with the diverse people and design their research projects. As the English department of Gondwana University, this is something that we can very preeminently do. So why not train our students in converting whatever knowledge they have into a language, and forget English? They probably may not be able to put their language in the so-called standard Marathi, which is read by hundreds of other people. Let's help them with that. So if they put that knowledge into a language that is more widely available, there is automatically a beginning of a bridge. So that is one kind of concrete suggestion that I am suggesting. So I think there are no more questions. Over to you, Vaiba.
Okay, thank you, sir. Uh, now I conclude this question answer and session. Thank you so much, sir, for delivering such a wonderful lectures. I hope that the participants have got some valuable inputs from the direction of framing the new syllabus. Now, I would like to request to uh, Dr. Vivek Joshi to propose the autopsies.
We can't hear you, Vivek. I think you are
Ask him
muted.
to unmute. Amol, uh, ask
Okay,
him to
sir.
unmute.
Hello, hello. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
I'm sorry for the mask. This is inevitable now. So I am very happy to extend my heartfelt welcome to our speaker, respected Dr. Amol Padwar sir, for sparing his valuable time with us, because I know that he is busy, very busy, and that is the reason why uh, uh, maybe we were rather changing this sequence and maybe the organizing or reorganizing the sessions frequently. Thank you very much, Amol sir, for your inspiring words. As far as you referred to the NEP provisions and the future and the curriculum in both the sides, bipolar way, I like that particular metaphor in a way that this is bipolar position and system. And the teachers will also be able to understand this from these points of views. I'm equally indebted to you for not only this session, and you will be with us for whenever we require your support. And I'm sure you will be very happy to extend that support, because I believe that the curriculum reforms or the curriculum design is not maybe instant process. It may take some time, and at different points of time we may require your suggestion and guidance. So I'm sure the board of studies and the members of PGTD who are on the task of setting new syllabus for the university and PG courses, you will be there to help them whenever and in whatever capacity they would ask you to help them. And besides, many of the participants of this workshop might not have asked the questions immediately, but still they may have their questions in future. So would you be able to answer them, Dr. Padwad, if any member asks these questions or maybe query or ask for any guidance?
Yeah, sure. I have also shared my emails on the last slide. So please feel free to write to me, or if you wish, call me. I'll be very happy if I'm of any use.
And sir, we are also planning to extend these kind of workshops for the UG teachers who are maybe more in number. I'm sure the workshops will have limitation of the number of participants at time. So we will have this in batches, and I'm sure you will be able to guide us in your maybe wherever we wish to because you are busy, but we will see your guidance and then we'll speak schedule and then we'll try to organize these things. And with this, I conclude. I thank also to the participants who are constantly with us since last 5 days for this particular workshop. So thank you one and all from my side. Over to Vaibhav.
Thank you, Vivek sir, and thank you, Amol Pradwar sir.
Thank you. Thank you and bye. Thanks.
Uh, Once again, to welcome to all for the validative functions of 5 days workshop.
Vaibhav. Just check whether Dr. Nimsarkar is on the board or what, because he's trying to join, but he is unable to join. Just see whether he's in the participants panel and ask him to be panelist in that case.
Okay.
We need him as the board chairperson, board of studies. In
Vaibhav, he is not there in the attendees.
because a while ago he called me to say that he is unable to join as a panelist. I have reshared the content and joining link to him. Just make sure that he is there or not. Dr. Gahane, would you be able to call him in that case because he needs some technical assistance in that?
Sir, I have joined through the phone.
Oh. My worry is I have joined, but I'm with so many kind of set of worries. Okay. ठीक है, चलो. Let us take a 2 minutes
Ask
kind of
any of the
time.
participants. There are many board of members in the attendees. I think Pulzele sir, are you there?
Hello.
Please call Dr. Nimsarkar sir and ask him to request him to join as panelist. Yes. Dr. Pulzele sir, if you can hear me, please call Dr. Nimsarkar sir or Badwaik sir. Someone from you.
Dr. Gahane,
Sir.
how many are there from the participants panel? What is the number of participants joining this particular?
I think they are 11 in number.
Great.
11. I can read the names also. It is Mandave sir.
No, not required.
Okay. Okay. Sir.
Actually, we are planning to extend these workshops for the UG teachers also.
Yes, it is necessary.
We will invite them in batches.
How many can join at a time?
There is limit of 100 at least for the WebEx, but as a workshop, we can't accommodate more than 25 in a batch.
Okay.
And board of studies member will be expected in all the sessions.
Okay. We were there.
Deliberation is
during this workshop also. We were there throughout the workshop. During all the 5 days, at least I joined it.
Good. Vaibhav is calling Dr. Nimsarkar.
Okay. Can't we unmute the attendees, Vivek sir?
Can unmute the attendees. Vaibhav and host can unmute attendees.
Okay. Because they are very small in number, we can share our views together.
Vaibhav being host can unmute the attendance.
Okay.
Sir, all the participants are unmuted now.
Participants are unmuted now.
Sir, my request, keep yourselves on mute mode.
Now this happens when you unmute all.
Now, if you wish to share something, then you can unmute yourself. At our end also, we have the choice to unmute and mute ourselves. Sir, Chandramouli sir was there also. If he is there. No, he too is not there in the attendees now.
Ganesh sir, can we ask participants to unmute themselves and share their feedbacks in the program? We will ask some
Yes,
participants.
yes,
So,
yes. That
so
will be a very
Vaibhav
good
sir
thing.
will manage that. Vaibhav sir will manage that.
Okay. Okay.
Vaibhav sir, go ahead.
Go ahead. Let's proceed, Vaibhav.
Okay, sir. Once again, to welcome to all for validatory functions. We are on the ending of the successful completions of postgraduate teaching department of English organized 5 days capacity online workshop on retrospect and prospect on syllabi framing for the program Master in English during 22nd March to 26th March 2021. I would like to request to Dr. Sri Ramagayan sir, Board of Studies member, Department of English, Arts and Commerce College, Desai Vadsan, join with us as a guest of honor. And Dr. Veer Joshi sir, join with us as a chairperson for the valedictory function.
Thank you.
Uh, First of all, I heartily welcome to Dr. Gahane sir on behalf of Postgraduate Teaching Department of English, Godwan District, Gadchirti, for the valedictory functions. And I also welcome to Dr. Vivek Joshi sir for this last sessions of workshop. Okay, now we are leading to the valedictory ceremony. I would like to request Dr. Ghane sir to enlighten us with his valuable words.
Thank you, Vaibhav. My dear friend and the head department of English at the postgraduate teaching department of English, Gondwana University, Gadchiroli, Dr. Vivek Joshi sir. All the participants whom I personally know well. My dear student, Vaibhav Masram sir. I must, at the very outset, congratulate the whole team of postgraduate teaching department of Gondwana University, Gadchiroli, on taking such a nice and inspirational initiative by organizing this 5-day capacity building online workshop on retrospect and prospect on syllabi framing for the program Masters in English. It was, in fact, a novel idea to get inputs from experienced and learned experts before initiating the process of framing syllabi for postgraduate students of English department in our university. Dear students, dear friends, this workshop began on 22nd of March, and I have been continuously in this workshop throughout all these 5 days. On the very first day, Dr. Bhosle from Hyderabad enlightened us with his experience and expert views. Dr. Nimsarkar sir was also there on that day. He too commented on the process of framing syllabi. And later on, whether it was my friend Krishna Dikshit sir or Dr. Mukta Mahajan ma'am, Dr. Urmila Dabir ma'am, all these experts expressed their views. They elaboratively told us about the practices that go on in their respective universities while framing the syllabi. They are learned people, they are experienced people, and most important thing is that they are dedicated to the service of the student fraternity. And today's lecture by my dear teacher, Dr. Amol Padwar sir, on curriculum and future was again really very insightful. These experts, I must comment on the nature of these experts. The most common and the unique similarity among all these 5 experts was that they all are interested in the creative aspect of English literature and language. Hence, their opinions matter for us. Whatever they have suggested will definitely be useful, will definitely a kind of guide to us to lead us in the framing of the syllabus. I believe that these experts' views, together with the dedicated and student-centric approach of the BUS members of Gondwana University and constructive suggestions from PG teaching teachers of affiliated colleges will help us give innovative and inspirational curriculum to our PG students to develop research aptitude among them. This workshop is going to prepare us academically to design such a syllabi under the able and focused directions from the chairman of the Board of Studies in English in our university, Dr. P.D. Nimsarkar sir. It's a very good and promising sign that even the students in our university nowadays have started writing to the BOS regarding their expectations from the syllabi. We have been experiencing this kind of practice from the side of the students. As the experts told us that the syllabi that we are going to design should not come from the teacher side only. We must have some inputs from other stakeholders, particularly from the students. And if the students have their suggestions in the framing of the syllabus, I believe that it will definitely be beneficial for almost all the stakeholders in our region. One suggestion I would like to give to the Board of Studies or to those members who have undertaken the action and we have undertaken the practice of framing the syllabus is that we need also to prepare objectives of a particular syllabus, course outcomes and program outcomes also are needed to be framed while framing the syllabus, because we are the teachers of English and many of us in their respective colleges function as the IQAC coordinators also. And we know the value of objectives and course outcomes and program specific outcomes and program outcomes of all the syllabuses. Dear friends, I take this opportunity to thank Postgraduate Teaching Department of English in our university for inviting me to be the guest of honor in the valedictory function of this very fruitful 5-day workshop. I hope and I believe that this workshop is going to instigate us, is going to inspire us to prepare a very important, very innovative, student-centric, research-based syllabus for the students of our university. Once again, I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us for valuable guidance. Lastly, I would like to request to Dr. Vivek Joshi, head of PGT of English, for his valedictory speech of 5 days workshop.
Are there any participants who would like to offer their feedbacks on this activity? Vaibhav sir, can you ask somebody if they are maybe interested in or if they are ready to share their feedbacks with us?
Okay, if anybody from the participant to share your feedback. Wait for a moment.
युवराज willing to speak?
तू साइन कम नाही मारली मला मी तू वकील बोलल्यावर साइन कम नाही मारली तुझे मॅडम हे म्हणजे नाव नाही वापरलं नाही.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, Vaibhav sir, for this opportunity to speak with the participants of this 5 days. Can you mute all? Vaibhav sir, can
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
so thank you very much, Vaibhav sir, for offering me this opportunity to speak with the participants of this workshop, which lasted for 5 days, and it was on the research select and prospect on syllabus framing. Though we call this for the masters in English, we are in the process of maybe framing syllabus for almost all the courses in the university programs. And I'm sure being members or in different faculties, because I understand that the teachers of English are not faculty specific, they are required to offer their services into other faculties like language, the interdisciplinary, and the science and technology. So I believe that the catchment area teachers' work is spread over the faculties. So in a way, they are interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach. So thank you very much, dear participants, for participating in this 5 days long capacity workshop. And equally, I am very sure that this is the modest and moderate beginning of the long journey, because the understanding about the designing syllabus and the theories of curriculum design cannot be shared and studied in the maybe span of 5 days. I understand this, but at the same time, I want to ensure you that we are planning to organize more workshops if required, repeated workshops if required, and we wish to extend this workshop for the UG teachers also. But given the infrastructural limitations on the mobility, and uh, being IQAC coordinators and the very important stakeholders in the quality related activities, English teachers are always burdened with twice responsibility. So I understand their occupancy in this particular system. So we will try to set these particular workshops, keeping in mind the convenience or of the teachers, and I'm sure they will give same response to this call in future. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks and gratitude towards the administration of the university, our academic leadership, Honorable Dr. Professor Srinivas Varkhedi sir, Vice Chancellor of the university, who very happily extended his support for the organization of this workshop. I am equally indebted to Dr. Kawat sir for extending all possible help for the smooth organization and conduct of this proceeding on the platform. I cannot forget the contribution of our registrar, Dr. A.Z. Chitade, who is always ready to extend his support to the faculty members and the department as and when required. Dear friends, this particular workshop was organized on outset a platform of so many activities around. We are we are here to discuss these possibilities and prospects of the syllabus at the background of the provisions in the NEP. NB 2020, as discussed by Honorable Dr. BP Bhosle in the keynote address, and Dr. Amol Padwad in this today's session, they were talking about the multilingualism and importance of language in the setting of this multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary courses. So they are looking at this subject and these courses not as an isolated faculty fraternity elective, but they are looking at this particular subject as a maybe mixture of so many issues, fundamental and co-fundamental, for the promulgation of new combinations and bunches of thought. So I think that was very fantastic start by Dr. Bhosle when he talked about this interdisciplinary nature and multidisciplinary nature of the curriculum. I'm also indebted to Dr. Krishna Dikshit, the first speaker of the session, who talked about the notions of syllabus and curriculum in different sections. He tried to look at the issue with from different perspectives, and I'm sure he was speaking our mind. We felt like he is speaking our mind like. So he's framing that particular topic around the chosen area of focus where he talked about the various ideas of framing of syllabus. Same thing, and I'm very equally indebted to Dr. Mukta Mahajan too, because I believe that these stalwarts from their universities, Dr. Mukta Mahajan from NMU Jalgaon or Dr. BP Bhosle from Hyderabad. So, the deliberate attempt to bring in these experts was to make you familiar with or to expose you with the fundamentals as well as the real issues in the framing of syllabus. Dr. Dabir also talked about the learner-centric activities and converting our content and our syllabus into need-based kind of syllabus and framework. She talked about the effort of the Board of Studies to conduct the online sessions for the UG courses and her plan to start this for the PG courses. So I think these realistic examples, these realistic solutions will inspire us, motivate us for thinking about our own situation and evolve the need-based or maybe customized kind of model for the students of this university. I'm sure we all are facing with so many issues and problems. But friends, with the positive mindset, I'm sure as in the past, the teachers will come out with the fantastic solutions in future too. For that, we require realistic syllabus, realistic assessment techniques, and I'm sure the teachers with the help of the OS will be able to do justice to this job also. Dear friends, though we are trying to understand the importance of this particular framing of syllabus and all, we are all work in the time-bound process. We can't spare time for such activities. So I request all the members of Board of Studies, respected members of the postgraduate teaching departments at different colleges, to set on the work now, because it will take time. It will take time. Let us plan the action and then let us focus on the stage-wise completion of the syllabus. I cannot forget to mention Dr. Nimsarkar, PD Nimsarkar, our Honorable Board of Studies Chairman of the Humanities Board of Studies English, for his constant support to this activity. He is with us through this particular planning and execution of the same, and I'm sure he has some technical issues to face, and that is the reason why he is not with us today. But I'm sure, though he is not with us today physically, his support is always with us, and he will be there to guide us whenever we ask him to do that. So, dear friends, let us start our journey now. Let us continue on our maybe developing the syllabus, and let us start meeting online if possible for the framing of the content. So, with this, and with the very heartfelt thanks from the organizers for the participants and the speakers and the university administration for their continuous support for this workshop. I wish to say thank you to my friends, faculty friends in the postgraduate teaching department, because only I know what kind of deliberations they are going through. So thank you everyone for your support, and I wish the same in the future too. With these words of heartfelt thanks, I hand over the proceedings to Vaibhav sir for the further process. Thank you very much. Vaibhav sir, please proceed. Vaibhav sir, please proceed. Hello, Vaibhav sir.
Thank you, Vivek sir. Thank you, Vivek sir, for such a delivering lectures and explain about to the future plan of a department from English teacher from Gondwana University, Gadchiroli. Uh, Now we are moving towards to the last phase of our workshop, is OTAP thanks. I extend my sincere thanks to Honorable Vice Chancellor Dr. Srinivasan Varkadis, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor Dr. Sridham Gowde, and Honorable Registrar Dr. Anil Chitade Gondwana University, Gadchiroli for his gracious presence in the workshop. I express my sincere thanks to our workshop invited speaker, Professor Bhimrao Bhosle sir, Dr. Krishna Dikshit, Dr. Mukta Mahajan ma'am, Dr. Urmila David ma'am, Dr. Amol Padwar sir for valuable guidance about syllabus framing for PG courses. I also express my sincere thanks to Honorable Chairman of BOS, Dr. P.D. Nimsagasan, or Dr. Gahan Sir, and all the BOS members from Gondwana University, Gadchiroli for presence and remarks on objective and role of board studies. I also express my thanks to Dr. Vivek Joseph, Head of Post-Graduate Teaching Department, for his guidance and motivation for new innovative activities. I also thanks for all participants from various college under the Gondwana University and faculty of postgraduate teaching department of English for attending the session. And I also special thank to Dr. Tari sir for active involvement in the technical process of workshop. With the prior permission of chairperson, the validity function is open. Uh, Thank you, Ganesh sir. Thank you, Yusuf.